Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the President and CEO of America's Promise Alliance, John Gompertz.
Thank you, and welcome to the closing session of the 2013 GradNation Summit. It's been quite a ride, and I thank all of you for your energy, your commitment, and your persistence through these days. I know everybody's tired. I know I'm tired. But we have a really strong finish, so I hope you enjoy your lunch and the final session. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Billy Shore, who's one of our speakers at this last session. Billy has been a remarkable leader in the nonprofit community. With his sister Debbie and other colleagues, he has created Share Our Strength and the No Kid Hungry campaign. Oh, and along the way, somehow at 4 in the morning, he wrote a series of brilliant and remarkable books about his ideas, his own development, and the work that we all do. But perhaps most remarkable and important is even in the maelstrom of running a nonprofit, which so many of you know about, running a campaign, which you also know about, writing these books, Billy has the ability to stand back and think about what builds a movement, how each of us in our communities, our organizations, and our lives can help bring about change. So I can't think of anything more valuable for us to hear as we close down this session. One thing you may not know about Billy is that Billy Shore was the chair, 1997, Billy Shore was the chair of the Private Sector Task Force for the President's Summit for America's Future, where America's Promise was actually born. So please join me in welcoming home our friend, our colleague, and our hero, Billy Shore.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. I appreciate John's really sweet introduction. As he mentioned, I have been involved with America's Promise from the very beginning and was on the founding board for 3 or 4 years, so it is really a treat to be back. It's a special treat for me to be here with one of my heroes, Harris Wofford, who's at the front of the room here and who I had a chance to talk to, and many, many friends. And what I really want to talk about a little bit today, and I'm going to be brief, is what I think of as this really unique blend of idealism and pragmatism that makes GradNation so special. I think of this blend of idealism and pragmatism a little bit in terms of something my 7-year-old son said recently. I'm going to leave aside for a moment the improbability of my having a 7-year-old son. But well, it wasn't improbable to me, but thanks to the magic of Facebook, my Facebook picture is myself and Rosemary and our son Nate. I got one of those notes you get from 30 years ago from a friend that you went to high school with that says, "I saw you on Facebook, isn't it wonderful? I have a grandson too." That was the only time I realized it was maybe improbable. But our son Nate has the great good fortune to spend a little bit of the summer at a place called Goose Rocks Beach in Maine. And he was down by the water's edge, and I was up farther, closer to our little cottage. And I saw him talking to a man down there who was with his son. And then I saw this man kind of look around, and I could tell he was looking for Nate's dad. And I went down, and he said, are you this young boy's father? And I said, "Yes, why?" And he said, well, he said something very interesting to me, which struck a note of fear in my heart, because I never know exactly what Nate's going to say. But I said, "What did he say?" He said, "Well, I'm here with my 7-year-old son, and we're building a sandcastle right here at the water's edge, and your boy comes up to me, puts his hands on his hips, and he says, 'Just so you know, I've seen a lot of these, and they're never here in the morning.'" Now, what I want to talk about today really is why GradNation is different, and why this idealism and pragmatism that you've brought to it is different. I want to start with some words of inspiration that came to me during just 4 weeks ago. We had an inaugural weekend here And the words of inspiration that I'm referring to did not come from President Obama, although I was very inspired by him as well. But at that same time, probably little noticed, except by baseball fans, there was an obituary in the New York Times of the Baltimore Orioles former manager, Earl Weaver. And I brought a paragraph of it to read to you today because I think it's so relevant. The obituary said that Weaver was famous for his tirades against umpires, which led to him being ejected from nearly 100 baseball games. In his defense, he explained, "I'd get so mad that I couldn't see straight. I mean, just a wrong ball or a strike call can cost you a game, and that can cost me my job, and now I can't send my kids through college. If an umpire misses a called third strike and the other side ends up scoring because of it, I'm not going to forget it. If there are runners on second and third and 2 out and the umpire's just given the hitter an extra strike and the next pitch goes into the hole and both runs score, I've got to say something to that guy. With that one call, he's keeping my kid from going to school." And what I loved about that is the degree to which Earl Weaver saw the connections, the way he saw things whole. Because I can't think of anything more like GradNation in the sense of it affects, your work affects all of us. And our children and their children are so directly impacted by what we do. And too often we fail to see the connections, and we fail to have the sense of outrage that an Earl Weaver felt. How else do we explain the fact that some of the most iconic food brands in the country market extremely unhealthy and unnutritious food to our children? And for all intents and purposes, we don't object. How else do we explain the fact that many of us, including the most socially responsible among us, are probably wearing clothes by American manufacturers that were made in conditions somewhere around the world that we wouldn't approve of? How do we explain the fact that a teacher's pension fund was invested in Cerberus Management, the company that owned the manufacturer of the guns used in Newtown? Too often we don't see the connections. Is it because we don't care? I don't think so. But is it because we don't care enough? Possibly. So how do we change that? How do we build a movement that really changes that? I just want to touch on a few of the strategies that we've tried to bring about at Share Our Strength, because we've had some experience at that. We're 28 years old, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about how do you do this work in ways that are more powerful. Over the last 2 or 3 years in particular, our anti-hunger organization, which launched the No Kid Hungry campaign, has experienced tremendous growth. If you use just revenues as a proxy, and 3 years ago we had revenues of about $19 million a year. Today they're $51 million. We had a staff of about 55. Today we have a staff of about 170. And most important, the impact has correlated to that. So let me just describe a few of the things we've done. And I think GradNation is probably closer than any other organization or effort or movement that I can think of to doing many of the same things already. And I offer them merely as an opportunity to perhaps find some shortcuts. The first most important thing we did, and as I say, GradNation has done this with your goal of 90%, is to really think in terms of go big or go home. How do we set a goal that is really going to inspire people? How do we find the tipping point that the writer Jonathan Kozol talks about in terms of picking battles that are big enough to matter but small enough to win? We decided in our work that we needed to do that around ending childhood hunger. We were an organization that was actually inspired by the famine in Ethiopia in 1984. That was our catalyst. Got to go back there some years later with Harris Wofford, who'd been the first Peace Corps director there. We were working on hunger across all levels. We realized that if we drilled down on childhood hunger, if we decided that we would set a firm goal and stick by it, live or die by it, it can be a double-edged sword, that would actually be a catalyst for more investment in our organization and more enthusiasm in our organization. And that was one of the things that we found to be the case. We also worked with our partner and our subsidiary, Community Wealth Ventures, which is a consulting firm wholly owned by Share Our Strength, to look at the characteristics of organizations and movements around the country and around the world that have been able to shift from incremental growth and change to truly transformational growth. And we identified several other characteristics as well, some of which we've experienced at Share Our Strength. Another one was the notion for us that capacity equals impact, that we must invest in our own capacity if we're going to grow a movement. The instinct in our world is to do just the opposite. In most nonprofit organizations, it's to put all of our resources out into the community, and that, of course, is for the most noble of reasons. But sometimes it comes at the expense of investing in ourselves, investing in talent, investing in resources, investing in training, and the things that you really need to be able to grow. And we really came to believe that investing in capacity, particularly talent, equals impact. The third thing we found was that accountability was a powerful differentiator in a really crowded and competitive marketplace, and that we really needed to understand how to hold ourselves accountable. When we worked with our community and said we were going to end childhood hunger by 2015, and here was our plan to do it, and we pulled 60 of the leading organizations in the anti-hunger community together, 59 of them were against the idea. How much would it cost? What if the economy changed? Wouldn't that be difficult to pull off? And what I heard was an undercurrent of almost cultural discomfort with being accountable to a specific goal. When we met with our business partners, it was the mirror image opposite. You've got a goal line, you know how far you are from it, you know what it's going to take to get across, we want to be part of that. The fourth thing that we found was that we need to not only collaborate, which we talk about all the time in our world, we need to learn to compete. We need to be competitive, not to put anybody else out of business, but to be the best and most effective version of ourselves. I had the great good learning curve and learning fortune of being on the Timberland board for 10 or 11 years. It's the only corporate board experience I've had, and one of the things I learned on that board was that at Timberland, the senior management of the company and the board was very focused on making sure that they were intentionally organized to outperform their peers. And they knew that to do so, that to compete at any level, they had to compete at every level. And so they didn't think of themselves as just competing to sell shoes or apparel to you and I. They thought of themselves as competing to get the best people who worked in fashion and footwear to come to Timberland and to stay there longer than their competitors were able to retain their top talent. So this notion that to compete at any level, we must compete at every level, and that we must not only collaborate, which of course we must do, but we must compete. And then, next to last, we realized that public policy was such a critical ingredient, and that for an organization made up, in our case, of social entrepreneurs, as important as it was, we came to think of social entrepreneurship almost without a public policy component, almost akin to a garage band that everybody thinks is very cool and very hip, but nobody hears 3 blocks away. That you've got to have public policy to amplify that. And one of the reasons, and one of the pivots we made as an organization was to not only do all the work that we were doing in the private sector and with food banks and other nonprofits and emergency food assistance organizations, but we realized that there were 21 million kids in this country who get a free school lunch, and only 11 million of them get breakfast, even though they're all eligible for it. So we fought hard for this school breakfast program. We fought hard for the summer meals program. It exists, and in the summertime, when the schools are closed, only 3 million kids get it, 16%. And we were fighting for new programs without making sure that the programs that existed were already utilized. And one thing that it means is that more than $1 billion, even in this budget climate, even with sequestration possibly 72 hours away, more than $1 billion is not only earmarked for these kids, it's exempt from sequestration. And we had to figure out what are the barriers to enrolling these kids in this program. In this way, your work and ours is so similar. Tomorrow, we will release a study that the consulting firm Deloitte did for us. It was an extensive study. In the 30 years that I've done this work, I've heard many times, and I've often repeated, that studies show hungry kids can't learn. So we decided to say, okay, let's go look at some of those studies. We ought to utilize them. It turns out they don't exist. There are almost no studies. It's one of the great myths that there are studies that say hungry kids can't learn. So we said, well, we'll do one, and Deloitte did that for us. And what they found is that in schools that have switched to universal school breakfast, where every kid does get breakfast, Maryland's a good example of this. We added 33,000 kids to the school breakfast program last year. We'll add 57,000 more in the next 3 years. In Maryland schools, the schools that have switched to universal school breakfast have math scores that are 17.5% higher. They have attendance rates that are 1.5 days longer. They have graduation rates that are 20% higher. And if you extend that out nationally, you can get to a point, as Deloitte showed us, where 800,000 more kids will graduate from high school if the school provides the basic resources that they need. So these are some of the elements, at least from the experience of Share Our Strength and Community Wealth Ventures, that we have found are critical to building a movement. And the last one that I would mention is just the belief and the conviction that has for us been time tested, that so many times when we fail, we tend to think it's a failure of resources, we don't have enough money, we sometimes think it's a failure of strategy, we didn't have the best plan. We've realized that it's almost always a failure of imagination. That inability to imagine a future that does not yet exist, but that is within our grasp to achieve. That's the most powerful thing that GradNation is doing. That's what you're about. Kids in this country aren't hungry because we don't have food, and kids aren't getting a good education because we don't have schools. Those situations exist because those kids don't have a voice, and you are that voice. We are that voice. And everything that we do in terms of the programs that we set up and that we fund and that we raise money for are critical, but the most important thing that we bring to it is that sense of voice. So I'll close with somebody who talked about what Earl Weaver talked about, but in ways far more eloquent. It was the wonderful poet Gwendolyn Brooks, who once wrote, "We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond." And I think those words are so true today as she wrote them 50 years ago. Whether we're bankers on Wall Street or bakers on Main Street, we are each other's harvest. And whether we're engineers or educators, we are each other's harvest. Whether we're building and designing video games for tomorrow or cathedrals to last 1,000 years, we are each other's harvest. That's what building GradNation is all about to me. Thank you for having me here today.
Wow, thank you, Billy. Thank you, Billy Shore, for those words and for all his leadership over the years. And now it's my great honor to introduce Congressman Joaquin Castro. When we think about the promise of America, the American dream, we think about stories like that of Joaquin Castro and his family. In so many ways, it really is the story of America. Congressman Castro, as probably all of you know, has already had a remarkable career, and someday he'll even be 40 years old. He's been a highly successful Texas legislator, and he's been already elected to the Congress. But today, Congressman Castro is here not just to talk about legislation or politics, but also to talk about the work that he has done in San Antonio to make it possible for kids just like him to follow the same path to opportunity and to success. That too is part of the American story and the promise of America, helping the next generation and the generation after that to have the opportunity to realize and live the American dream. So from San Antonio and now the halls of Congress, it is an honor to welcome Joaquin Castro to the GradNation movement and the GradNation Summit. Congressman Castro.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing today? Good. Well, it's wonderful to see everybody here today. My name is Joaquin Castro, and of course, I am from San Antonio, Texas, and am in my first term in Congress, my first few months, actually. And I also have a twin brother, Julian, who is the mayor of San Antonio, who spoke at the Democratic National Convention. So in case you were wondering, you're not talking to the mayor of San Antonio. I'm the congressman. I tell folks that there are two ways to tell us apart. There is a quick way and an easy way. The quick way is that my brother's been very blessed. He has a wonderful wife, Erica, and I have a 4-year-old niece, Karina. And so he has the wedding ring, and I don't have it yet. I'm working on it, but I'm not there yet. But the easy way to tell us apart, in case you see my brother or meet him, is that I'm a lot better looking than he is. I'm just kidding. I want to say, first of all, thank you to GradNation for inviting me to be here to join you for this conference. And thank you, each of you in this room, for all of the incredible work that you do on behalf of the young people of our nation and behalf of education, and really the kind of work that honors our past, that honors our ancestors, honors our country, and also looks forward to the future in building what I will call an infrastructure of opportunity in America, which I want to talk to you about in just a second. You know, it's always interesting, before you start a speech or an event, people will often introduce you and go through a list of the different things that you've done in your life. And in many ways, I feel like that's somebody telling you the end of a movie without you ever having seen the movie. Everything that went into making that possible. And for me, like for many of you, that story is very special. My brother, several months ago, had a chance to tell a little bit about it, and it started with our grandmother, Victoria Castro, who came to this country when she was 6 years old. She came as an orphan from a northern state in Mexico called Coahuila, Mexico. My grandmother came because both her parents had died during the time of the Mexican Revolution, and she came to live with relatives who were the closest to her, who could take her in, and they were in San Antonio, Texas, which is how my family ended up there. But my grandmother lived in a household with 9 or 10 or 11 folks throughout the years, and she dropped out when she was in the 3rd grade. She dropped out because she had to help work and help support, as the other kids did, the family. Because my grandmother never had a formal education, you can imagine she worked as a maid, a babysitter, and a cook her entire adult life. And she did that, I believe, for 2 reasons. First, to get by for herself, but also, second, to do everything that she possibly could so that my mom would have a better chance in life than she did, and so that her only grandkids, my brother and I, would have an even better chance than her and my mom. My mom was the first in her family to go on to college, the first in her family to get a graduate degree, and her life was markedly different from my grandmother's life. And my brother and I have been very fortunate, and our lives have been different even than my mom's. But the reason that I share that story with you is not because I think that it's a special story. It's because I think that story is common to many of our families. The immigrant story of coming to America for opportunity is a story that is common to the Germans, to the Italians, to the Irish, to the Koreans, to the Chinese, to just about every group you can imagine. At some point, somebody came to the United States because they believed that there was opportunity that they could find here that didn't exist somewhere else. And the reason I say that to you now is because I think it's important for us to realize what has made America special among the nations of the world. I would submit to you that there were 3 things that have made our country special. The first is that we are a free nation, that we are not ruled by anybody from outside our borders or ruled in a tyrannistic way by anybody inside our borders. Second, that we are a democracy, that we have the opportunity to select our leaders, and when we don't agree with them, we have a chance to kick them out. But the third piece, I believe, is not only the topic of conversation today, oftentimes a topic of conversation in our Congress. It's what led me into public service. And I think it is the time that you spend your lives on. And that is creating opportunity for Americans today and in the future. I would argue that one of the main things that distinguishes our country from the rest of the world is not just that we have the most rockets and bombs. It's not just that we have a chance to go to a voting booth and vote in an election. It's also that we have created an infrastructure of opportunity in this country to allow people to achieve their American dreams. And let me be a little bit more specific about that. Imagine when you were 8 years old or 10 years old and somebody asked you what you wanted to be when you grew up. and you said, I want to be a teacher or an engineer or a policeman or a fireman, think about in a society what it takes to allow that achievement to happen. See, I believe that just as there's a system of streets and roads and highways that helps each of us get to where we want to go on the road, in America, there's another kind of infrastructure. It's an infrastructure of opportunity that helps each of us get to where we want to go in life. And it's incumbent upon those of us in government, those of us in business, in the community, to help build up that infrastructure of opportunity in our nation. And the cornerstones of that infrastructure are a great public school system and a great university system. How does somebody become an engineer? They get a good education, they go on to college, maybe they go on to graduate school, and then they go into the workforce. What has made America special is that more than any other nation in the world, we have been the nation throughout the generations that has built up that infrastructure of opportunity. It's the reason I believe that many years ago, European immigrants sought to come to our shores, that today, Mexican immigrants literally die across the desert coming to our shores. And I would urge us, as we consider things like sequestration, as we think about immigration, which in many ways, with all of its difficult challenges, is a blessed burden. After all, there is a scarier day in America than when everybody wants to come here. That scarier day is when nobody wants to come here. And we should never lose our competitive edge among the nations of the world of being the place that represents opportunity and hope for all those who seek it. It means investing in public schools, investing in our universities, making sure that we are literally building out that infrastructure of opportunity. And as I say that, I want you to know that I think that there are two parts to that. There is literally a physical part of that infrastructure of opportunity, and then there's a policy part, and I want to talk a little bit about both. For me, the physical part, and I think for all of us, is absolutely critical. And I want to give you a quick example. Is anybody here from Texas? Any Texans in the house? Maybe a few, all right. There is a place in Texas called the Texas Valley. It is mostly along the Texas-Mexico border, and there are cities like Mission and Edinburgh and Brownsville that are part of it. And it is about 3.5 hours from my hometown of San Antonio. There are about 1 million to 1.5 million people that live in this area. But you might be surprised to know that with all of those people, you can't get a law degree anywhere south of San Antonio, Texas. You can't get a medical degree anywhere south of San Antonio, Texas. Until about the year 2000 or so, you could not get a doctoral degree anywhere in that region. That, I believe, is a lack of infrastructure in creating or allowing for opportunity in a community. So creating those institutions, investing in graduate programs that allow people to pursue their dreams, all of those, I think, are part literally of the physical infrastructure of opportunity. But there's also another part, and it's where I've spent much of my time, and that is the policy part. You see, I believe that there are many challenges that we face in education which we've not been able to address very effectively over the years. And I want to name a few of them. And bear in mind, I'm the proud son of a teacher. My dad was a teacher for 31 years, 26 of those in the Edgewood Independent School District. Edgewood was the district that started the push for school finance parity and equality in a case that made it all the way to the Supreme Court in 1973, SAISD versus Rodriguez. Many of the fights that we've had over the years in state legislatures mostly, but also in the Congress, over teacher pay, over distribution of resources, whether this college is going to get an engineering program or whether that one's going to get a medical school. In all of those battles that we've seen, we've often overlooked some of the behind-the-scenes things that in education are very important. And I'd like to point out a few of those to you. The first is, I believe that our college advising system, the way we do it now, is an anachronism. And the reason I say that is this. We know, for example, in Texas, that for every counselor, there are 420 students who are needing advice on college advising. In other words, the counselor-to-student ratio is 1 to 420 in Texas. In California, it's about 1,000 to 1. So those counselors are our primary our primary advisors, they're the ones that are giving college advice to our students, yet we've set up a system that is not adequately prepared or able to properly give advice to our students. And there, I think we should distinguish, in Texas in the 1990s, standardized tests and high-stakes testing really came into vogue, and that movement spread across the country. And now we have a lot of reservations about that. But a big focus of that movement was preparing students to be college ready. I'm sure everybody has heard that term. That is a very worthwhile pursuit, making sure that substantively students are ready to go on to college and ready to go on to the workforce. But we shouldn't believe, or we need to distinguish between a student being substantively prepared to go on to college and having a set of personnel and policies in place to make sure that those students actually get to college. And I've done a lot of work in Texas in trying to revise our college advising system to make sure that once we prepare our students, that once they're adequately prepared to go on to college and into the workforce, that we actually have the personnel to help guide them there. I also believe that, thank you, I imagine maybe we have some counselors in the house here. All right. We also need to be sure that once we graduate our students and once we send them off to college, that they actually graduate from college. Would you believe that in Texas, some of our college graduation rates are lower than our high school graduation rates? Some of our community college graduation rates hover below 20%. So one of the big challenges that we face, as you all know, is making sure that the students that come out of our high schools are not only prepared to go to college, but once they get to college are academically successful. And many students, about 40% in Texas, placed into some level of remedial or developmental education. And folks, developmental education in many ways is the graveyard of higher education. So many students with a lot of aspirations and so many big dreams, their dreams literally die in developmental education. And there are many reasons for that. But a few of them include the fact that it can take you up to 2 years in many states to get out of developmental ed. During those 2 years, you're often not receiving financial aid to pay for it. Many students are in this work-school tug-of-war, so sometimes when things get tough, rather than continuing on in college, they'll go ahead and work. I remember I was back home, I was in law school in the 1990s, and I was back home for a summer, and I ran into an old friend who I went to high school with and had graduated with from Jefferson High School in San Antonio. And I asked her, I said, I knew that she was in college. I asked her, how's it coming? When are you going to graduate? Now, this was 7 years after we had graduated from high school. She said, I only had about 2 classes left, and I wanted to take them in the fall, but my manager, and she was working there at the mall, my manager said he needs me to work certain hours during the day, so it just wasn't going to work out. So instead of going back to school and finishing, she decided that she was going to work. You see a lot of students who are in this work-school tug-of-war who are stuck in developmental education. So in Texas, one of the things we've tried to do is shorten developmental education without watering it down, give people options to speed it up on their own schedule, and also to make sure that more students get through it and get on and graduate from college. I also want to say that we believe in San Antonio that students should start early in education and go long. By that I mean we believe that pre-kindergarten education is one of the most important things that you can do in a child's life to make sure that they are successful. I'm very proud that San Antonio voters in November approved a 1/8 cent sales tax to make San Antonio the city in Texas that provides the most full-day pre-K of any other city in our entire state. It was an investment by the people of San Antonio, a belief in the potential of our young people, and a belief that our future is very much tied to the educational fate of so many of our students. I also am very hopeful about what we've got going on with vocational ed. For many years, especially as we think about dropouts, we know that there are many reasons that folks drop out. Some people grow bored, feel unengaged, unchallenged, and so that they decide that they would rather spend their time somewhere else. Some folks, oftentimes young women in high school, will face teen pregnancy and out of embarrassment or hardship will decide that they're no longer going to continue in school. Some folks feel like high school is no longer for them because the classes they're taking are not classes that interest them and they have other interests. On each of those fronts, we've tried in different ways to make sure that we plug those holes. We're using technology more in Texas to make sure that our students are more engaged in a 21st century world. We are doing everything that we can, at least in San Antonio, to make sure that we reduce our teen pregnancy rate, make sure that students who are pregnant feel that there is still a place for them in high school, and those who stop out are welcome to come back. We work with them and their families, and making sure that they know the value of a good education. I understand that you all have dedicated, many of you, your careers to preventing dropouts and also to doing everything you can to build that infrastructure of opportunity in America. I hope that you will always work in earnest, not only with the community, in your nonprofits, but also with elected officials to make sure that everything that we do in education is a way to keep America competitive in the world, to make sure that we're still a land of opportunity, and continue in every way that we possibly can to build out that infrastructure of opportunity for us and also for our kids and our grandkids. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thank you. One more round of applause for Congressman Castro. As we round the final corner here, it's my tremendous pleasure to introduce a little video, a little Valentine of sorts, from one very special American to all the special Americans who are with us here today and who are part of this GradNation campaign.
Hello, I am Maya Angelou. There was a song which said, when it looked like the sun wasn't shining anymore, God put a rainbow in the clouds. Just imagine that. I wish I were with you at the building at GradNation Summit so I could see all your beautiful faces in person. But I know that I am there in spirit. Please know that. And I want to send you a message as you begin to think about your journey home, as you pack your bags, as you hail your taxis, board your trains, and catch your flights. I hope you will think about the journey you have embarked on over the past few days. And I wish you would think about your continued journey, your lifelong journey, your journey as students, as educators, as faith leaders, as business executives, as representatives of your community. I would like you to think of your journey as human beings. I would like to think of your journey as being rainbows in the clouds. You, in fact, are rainbows in clouds of faces you've never seen, whose names you will never hear. The truth is that that 19th century slave song was inspired by a statement in Genesis. We are told in Genesis that rain had persisted so unrelentingly that people thought it would never cease. In an attempt to put the people at ease, God put a rainbow in the sky. That was in Genesis. In the 19th century, an African-American lyricist, a poet, probably a woman, I'm not sure about that, said God didn't just put the rainbow in the sky. God put the rainbow in the clouds themselves. Now we know at the worst of times, there's a possibility, because the rainbow is in the clouds, there's a possibility of seeing hope. Most of the time, however, if the rainbow isn't in the clouds can so lower and lower that the viewer cannot see the possibility of hope. You are the hope. Imagine that. people look at what you are creating. Just in this summit alone, the dreams you have, the insight you've shown, indeed the courage you have to care for somebody who doesn't look like you, who may not call God the same name you call God, if they call God at all. In fact, may dance different dances. In fact, may eat the same foods, but prepared differently. And here you are, daring to be a rainbow in their clouds, giving them hope. Whatever your role, I hope you will continue to be proud of yourselves. And please be grateful. Know that I, Maya Angelou, am grateful to you. I join thousands of people in gratitude to you. And I thank you for having the courage to say, no matter what, I promise to try to be a rainbow in someone's cloud. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. And here we are coming to the end of a wonderful, wonderful summit. I want to thank all of you for being here, and I hope that you have enjoyed this. It is truly an honor for me to follow those wonderful, elegant words of Maya Angelou. She is truly an American icon. And I'm very grateful to Congressman Castro, who spoke to us so eloquently about his life in San Antonio. Now, before I get started in saying goodbye to you, I would like for you, the attendees of the summit, to give a great round of applause to the America's Promise staff that has worked so hard to put this program on. All of you who are in the room, stand up. They worked so hard and did such a wonderful, wonderful job. I hope that you've had a good time talking about new ideas, but I hope that you also have a new sense of faith and confidence that comes from seeing real progress towards our goal. That was really a bright spot in this summit. And I hope that you come away with a great sense of rededication to the role and to the things that you will do in the future. These summits are not simply a time when we look back on our progress. They are a time when we look forward and recommit ourselves to the hard work that lies ahead. To borrow Winston Churchill's words from a very different campaign, this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. And so we move on. We have reached a turning point in our campaign to be a GradNation, but while we celebrate progress, we must remind ourselves that a turning point is not victory. Don't relax on your laurels and say, we're doing good. We cannot allow complacency to deter us from the completion of this work. We must not only stay the course, but redouble our efforts to inform and engage this entire nation on behalf of our most important resource. So I give you a charge to go forth from here with renewed sense of purpose and in the certain knowledge that we are changing this nation's future together, setting us on a course to realize the promise of American ideals and the promise that is within the reach of every child. I leave you with one of my favorite phrases that I am told the Maasai warriors, people of Kenya, the Maasai people of Kenya use when they greet each other. Every day we must ask ourselves, and how are the children? So I leave you with that. Every day, look around you and say, and how are the children? When we can answer each other and say, the children are well, until then, our work is not done. Thank you again for being here. We look forward to seeing you next year.
People out there who tell me all the reasons why poor children can't learn and why black and brown children can't learn. But
To be honest, I don't quite feel successful yet. I'm moving in the right direction though. Because I am lucky to have found the right supports that I need, now I know myself as an individual.